where art no longer redeems but consumes, where beauty, instead of lifting the soul toward heaven, feasts on what is left of the soul itself. Walk through them, and you will hear the faint applause of ghosts, the noise of a culture that has mistaken admiration for understanding and exhibition for meaning. They are called galleries, yet they are not temples of light. They are cemeteries of spirit, decorated in marble and gold. Every painting breathes with the pride of its maker, and every visitor hungers to be seen in the reflection of that pride. We think we come to witness creation, but we come to devour it. For when meaning dies, consumption begins. The living feed on the glory of the dead and call it appreciation. The artist dies in pursuit of immortality, and the audience feeds on his remains. The truth is that the world has turned holiness into an aesthetic, virtue into theater, and the sacred into spectacle. And so this sermon begins not with condemnation, but with revelation. Because these 7 galleries do not exist in the streets of any city. They exist in the corridors of the human heart. The first gallery is the house of reputation. It is the place where men polish the mirrors of perception until they can no longer see their reflection clearly. Every wall in this gallery gleams with the varnish of self-display. Every portrait whispers, "Be admired or be forgotten." Here, humility is a costume, not a conviction. Prayer becomes performance. Service becomes strategy. The applause of men becomes the echo that replaces the voice of God. Step inside and you will feel the suffocation of pretending to be holy. The air smells of perfume and pride. People speak softly, but every sentence is a negotiation with vanity. Even charity here is done under a spotlight. The most dangerous sin of this gallery is not arrogance, but subtle idolatry, the worship of one's own reflection in the name of righteousness. For what is reputation but a shadow cast by the light of truth? And when we chase the shadow, we walk away from the light. The saints who sought no fame still speak through centuries. The proud who demanded recognition vanish before their tombstones fade. It is a strange law of heaven that what you try hardest to display is what you most quickly lose. The second gallery is the Museum of Comparison. In it, people do not look at art. They measure it. They do not celebrate creation. They compete. Each gaze becomes a weapon, each compliment a hidden envy. And the irony is this: no one here ever truly sees beauty because they are too busy counting it. Comparison poisons wonder. It transforms gratitude into resentment and excellence into anxiety. The artist becomes jealous of his own admirer. The admirer becomes bitter at the artist, and both forget the divine source of inspiration. In this gallery, joy cannot survive, because joy does not compare. It is the oldest disease of the soul to look at another's blessing and call it proof of your own inadequacy. But the heavens do not repeat themselves. God does not create 2 sunsets nor 2 souls alike. Yet man, in his blindness, measures his worth by the shadows of others and wonders why he feels so small. In the Museum of Comparison, the frames grow larger as the hearts grow smaller, and though everyone walks with a polite smile, each one leaves hungrier than before. The third gallery is the Cathedral of Prosperity. It gleams like heaven, but hums like a marketplace. Its altar is gold, its incense the scent of ambition. The choir sings of victory, not virtue, of blessings, not burdens. Faith here has been remodeled into a transaction: give that you may gain, serve that you may succeed, pray that you may profit. And yet, prosperity was never meant to be worshipped. It was meant to be shared. The river of abundance turns poisonous when it ceases to flow. Hoarded wealth grows mold, and stagnant comfort breeds decay. True riches have always been the overflow of gratitude, not the accumulation of gain. But the Cathedral of Prosperity hides this truth behind stained glass optimism. It teaches men to smile their way through emptiness, to declare victory while starving for peace. And the tragedy is not that they are greedy, it is that they are deceived. For wealth without wisdom is the slow death of meaning, and success without purpose is the longest road to despair. You can tell when the soul has been sold in this cathedral. The eyes no longer shine with faith. They glitter with calculation. The mouth still speaks of miracles, but the heart measures everything in numbers. Even God becomes a means to an end, an accessory to ambition, and thus the eternal is reduced to economics. There is a subtle terror in this, for the man who worships wealth will eventually sacrifice everything sacred upon its altar: family, conscience, even joy. He will trade serenity for success and call it maturity. He will trade compassion for competition and call it realism. He will lose himself gradually, transaction by transaction, until his soul becomes another commodity displayed in the gallery of the living dead. But listen closely. You can still hear a faint echo beneath the noise of applause and greed. It is the cry of the human heart, whispering through the marble, "There must be more than this." And there is. But first you must leave the cathedral. You must step out into the silence where no one is watching, where no one is selling, where no one is comparing. There, and only there, the soul begins to breathe again. There you will remember that abundance was never gold, but grace. The fourth gallery is quieter than the rest. There are no speeches here, no applause, no shimmering canvases, only silence, thick, heavy, deceptively peaceful. You step inside and think for a moment that you've found rest, but this is not peace. It is paralysis. It is the stillness of souls that have forgotten how to feel. Welcome to the Hall of Indifference. Here beauty hangs on the wall and no one looks up. Truth walks among the crowd and no one listens. Suffering stands in the doorway, begging for compassion, and no one turns. The people here have learned the art of surviving without caring. They smile, but their eyes are glazed with apathy, the kind that grows when comfort becomes a god. The floor gleams, the air smells of serenity, yet something rots beneath it all. For when the heart ceases to ache for others, it begins to decay. Indifference is not neutrality. It is slow death disguised as balance. It is the silence that lets evil speak uninterrupted. It is the comfort that watches injustice and calls it none of my business. The tragedy of this gallery is that it feels so safe. No one argues, no one bleeds, everyone seems content, too content. The temperature never changes, the music never stops. It is the spiritual equivalent of anesthesia, and that perhaps is its power. It doesn't destroy your soul, it numbs it. Indifference does not scream. It whispers, "You've done enough." It does not tempt with pleasure. It lulls with peace. It does not demand your sin. It invites your silence. And by the time you realize you've grown cold, your compassion has already frozen into marble. It is here that many believers fall not through rebellion but through routine. They pray without presence, serve without passion, love without fire. They speak of grace, but it is mechanical. They offer kindness, but it is conditional. They are not wicked, they are weary. Weary from pretending, weary from striving, weary from caring too much in a world that rewards caring too little. But make no mistake, indifference is not rest. True rest restores the soul. Indifference drains it quietly. True peace awakens gratitude. Indifference breeds emptiness. You see, the devil does not always come as chaos. Sometimes he comes as calm. The calm that convinces you there's no need to change, no urgency to act, no purpose to pursue. The calm that says, everything's fine, while your faith quietly withers from neglect. And how easy it is to stay here, to mistake numbness for balance, to confuse disconnection with maturity. You can spend years in this gallery, applauded by the world for your composure, while your spirit cries out in the distance for something real. For what is a life without passion but a candle without flame? It still stands, but it gives no light. There comes a moment, if grace still lingers in you, when the silence of indifference becomes unbearable. When you wake one morning and realize you have everything: comfort, stability, reputation, but you feel nothing. That emptiness is mercy. It is the whisper of God reminding you that numbness is not peace, that safety without meaning is the most dangerous prison of all. And when that moment comes, do not resist it. Let the ache return. Let your heart break for something again, for beauty, for truth, for the hurting, for the lost, even for your own wasted time. The first sign of resurrection is pain. Indifference is the tomb of the living. But awareness is the stone being rolled away. There is a strange glow to this place. It is not the light of revelation, but of stage lamps. The shadows move here, elegant, rehearsed, perfectly timed, and the crowd mistakes performance for conviction. This is the theater of hypocrisy, where sincerity is an endangered species and holiness is a script. The moment you enter, you can smell the incense of intention, not real, but cosmetic. Every gesture has purpose, but no heart. Every smile is deliberate, every tear rehearsed. You are not among sinners or saints, but actors, each dressed in borrowed virtue. They speak of love while competing for applause. They preach about humility while craving recognition. They perform forgiveness, but never practice it in secret. The tragedy is not that they deceive others, it's that they have deceived themselves. For hypocrisy does not begin with malice. It begins with exhaustion. A man tries so hard to appear good that he forgets how to be honest. A woman repeats the language of faith until her own voice no longer sounds like truth. They grow addicted to the feeling of approval, to the illusion of holiness reflected in the eyes of the audience, and the audience claps, unaware they are also part of the act. For hypocrisy is not a single actor's performance, it is a shared delusion. It requires both performer and spectator. One lies to appear righteous, the other lies by pretending to believe it. Both are nourished by the same false light. But there is something deeply tragic about this theater. It was built by good intentions. Once these people were pure. They longed for God, for purpose, for love. But somewhere along the way, the hunger for truth was replaced by the hunger for approval. It is a subtle transformation, almost invisible. You pray not to be close to God, but to be seen as someone who is. You give not to serve, but to prove that you are generous. You speak of compassion because silence might reveal your indifference. And slowly, the act becomes identity. The stage lights become the Sunday. The applause becomes the spirit. The costume becomes the skin. And then comes the terrible moment when the mask fits better than your own face, when removing it would hurt more than wearing it. You begin to fear authenticity because it feels naked. You fear silence because it has no audience. You fear God because he cannot be impressed. That is the curse of this gallery. It offers praise without purity, attention without transformation. It gives you everything except what you actually need. You can be adored by thousands and still be invisible to heaven. And how could it be otherwise? For God does not dwell in the theater. He dwells in the backstage. He meets you in the silence after the show, when the makeup has been wiped away and the applause has died. That is where truth lives, not beneath the spotlight, but beneath surrender. The actors of this theater speak fluently of virtue, but their words have no roots. The soil of their soul is too shallow to sustain anything real. Their goodness is ornamental, their kindness strategic. It is a gallery of polished lies. Yet listen carefully. Not all who perform are malicious. Some are simply afraid. Afraid that if the world saw who they really were, they would no longer be loved, and so they hide behind the veil of perfection, believing it will protect them. But perfection is a prison, and the longer you dwell inside it, the more you forget the sound of your own heart. The theater of hypocrisy feeds on fear. The fear of being small, the fear of being human, the fear of not being enough. And as long as that fear remains, the stage will never be empty. But there is one who refuses to act, one who walks across the stage, removes the costume, and speaks the unscripted truth, trembling, raw, alive. The audience grows silent. The lights flicker. Something real is happening. It is uncomfortable, but holy. For honesty, once spoken, is contagious. It pierces the illusion like sunlight through stained glass. And in that moment the theater trembles. The actors forget their lines. The audience forgets to clap. Everyone remembers for the first time in years what it means to be real. Truth does not perform, it reveals. It exposes not to humiliate, but to heal. When you leave this gallery, you may feel stripped, unprotected, small. But that nakedness is the beginning of purity. That trembling is the first breath of freedom. For God has no use for perfect performances. He speaks only to those willing to remove the mask and meet him as they are. Better a single honest prayer whispered in darkness than 1,000 eloquent ones performed for the crowd. Better the trembling sinner who admits his need than the polished saint who pretends he has none. The theater burns when honesty enters. Let it burn. The air here is heavier, thicker, as though it carries the scent of ambition burned down to ash. You hear the murmurs before. You see the crowd, the sound of 1,000 quiet transactions, not of money, but of souls. This is the market of broken crowns, where men and women trade their purpose for power, their conscience for crowns, their eternity for applause that does not last the night. It is not chaos here, but choreography. The merchants of glory move with grace. Every smile is measured, every handshake a calculation, every promise dipped in gold. The market gleams with opportunity. You can buy influence, you can sell integrity, you can rent conviction if you can't afford to keep it. Every stand has its slogan, every stall its price. But if you listen closely, beneath the polished words and perfumed motives, you'll hear a deeper sound, the faint clatter of crowns hitting the floor. Crowns once pure, once meant for service, now cracked under the weight of pride. These crowns were never stolen, they were surrendered. A man comes with a gift of wisdom, but he trades it for recognition. A woman comes with a calling to heal, but she trades it for fame. A preacher begins with truth, but he trades it for relevance. And when all is done, the crowns that once shone with heaven's light lie shattered trophies of a war against one's own soul. This is how the galleries feed, not on death itself, but on what dies within the living. For every time a person trades purpose for position, something sacred withers. Every time love becomes strategy, every time humility becomes brand, every time truth is adjusted to please the crowd, another crown breaks. And you can feel it here, in the air. The vibration of loss, disguised as success. The market of broken crowns has its own theology. It preaches that influence is proof of favor, that control is the same as calling, that noise is the measure of impact. It whispers that leadership is domination, not stewardship, that to serve you must first conquer. But power, detached from purity, is nothing more than a candle in a furnace. It burns fast, it blinds, and then it vanishes. The merchants here never rest. They sell visions of greatness, not to the desperate, but to the almost righteous, those who still carry enough goodness to crave meaning, but have lost the patience to earn it through obedience. And so they buy shortcuts, borrow crowns, polish borrowed glory, and hope no one sees the cracks. But the cracks always show, not in the eyes of the crowd, but in the silence of the night. Because when the curtain closes and the market sleeps, the soul that has bartered its purpose cannot rest. It hears the faint echo of what could have been the voice it silenced, the integrity it sold, the peace it abandoned for prestige. And the truth, once sold, does not return easily. It haunts, it waits, it demands to be reclaimed through surrender. Yet the mercy of God runs deeper than our deception. Even here, in this marketplace of false thrones, redemption walks unnoticed. It does not shout. It simply stands beside the broken crown and whispers, "It can still be mended, but not by you." To pick it up again requires something the market cannot sell: repentance, the courage to be small, the humility to be unseen, the willingness to start over without applause. And when you do, something extraordinary happens. The pieces of the crown begin to fuse not with gold, but with grace. The cracks do not disappear. They gleam brighter than before, proof that what was once corrupted has now been redeemed. It is then you realize the secret this market hides, that power was never meant to be possessed. It was meant to be poured out, that the true crown is not worn, but carried, that the greatest kings are those who have laid their crowns at the feet of something greater than themselves. The market of broken crowns teaches by inversion. It shows what happens when glory is divorced from goodness, when success forgets to kneel. But those who escape it carry a wisdom few ever learn, that no throne is safe unless built upon service, no influence sacred unless surrendered. And perhaps this is what the world forgets most easily, that to reign in truth, one must first die to the desire to be seen. Only then does power become holy. Only then does the crown fit without crushing the skull beneath it. You feel it the moment you step inside. The silence here is not quiet. It hums with a strange intensity, as if the walls themselves are breathing. The light is dim, soft enough to calm, but bright enough to reveal. And then you see them, the mirrors, endless, flawless, arranged like an army of reflections, each one waiting for you to look. This is the gallery of mirrors. There are no paintings here, no sculptures, no masterpieces to admire. Only you. Only the self multiplied, refracted, unrelenting. Each mirror whispers a version of who you think you are, who you pretend to be, who you once were, and who you fear you'll never become. At first, it feels harmless. You smile at your reflection, adjust your posture, remember how you wish to be seen. But the mirrors do not flatter. They expose. They show you what applause cannot drown out: the quiet vanity behind your service, the envy behind your admiration, the doubt behind your prayers. Here, masks do not work. The reflection sees through them. You can lie to the crowd, to your friends, even to your own memory, but not to the glass that has no opinion. It reveals not the face, but the fracture. And that is why this gallery terrifies the soul, because it does not accuse. It simply reflects. There is no condemnation here, only truth. And truth, when it is pure, burns like light in a dark room. You begin to see the lines you've drawn between your public righteousness and private weakness. The words you said for praise, the moments you withheld love to preserve power, the times you called your ambition calling, your greed vision, your fear wisdom. Every mirror tells a story, and each one ends the same. You knew better. You move from one reflection to the next, hoping one of them will let you escape, but they only multiply. You see not just yourself, you see every version of yourself that could have been. The generous one you abandoned for success, the honest one you silenced for safety, the compassionate one you buried beneath control. The gallery has no exit, only recognition. You cannot leave until you've stopped running. And in that stillness, when there is nowhere else to look, you begin to see something new. Behind every distortion, every scar, every shadow, there is a faint light, A reflection not of the self you created, but the self you were created to become, the divine imprint beneath the dust, the image that was not lost, only hidden. It is then you realize this gallery was never meant to shame you. It was meant to save you. For there can be no resurrection without revelation, no forgiveness without facing what must die. The world teaches you to edit yourself, to curate your flaws, to hide the parts that don't perform well. But heaven teaches you to confront yourself, to meet your contradictions with courage, to bring your hypocrisy into the light and call it by name, because the truth that humbles you is the same truth that heals you. And so you stay trembling, exposed, undone, until the reflection begins to soften, until the eyes staring back no longer condemn you but understand you, until you can finally say, yes, this is me, unworthy, unfinished, yet loved beyond measure. And in that moment something shifts. The mirrors begin to change. The reflections dissolve, one by one, until only one remains, not your perfection, but your surrender. Not the face you present to the world, but the face God saw when He called you worthy before you ever earned it. You realize then that every gallery before this, the house of reputation, the museum of comparison, the cathedral of prosperity, the hall of indifference, the theater of hypocrisy, the market of broken crowns, were not buildings at all. They were rooms inside you, stages of the soul's decay, lessons carved in pride and pain. And here, in this last gallery, you meet their purpose, not destruction, but redemption. Because it is only when the mirrors have stripped away every lie that the spirit becomes transparent enough for grace to enter. The man who walks out of this gallery will not walk with swagger, but with peace. He will not need to be admired, because he has learned to be seen. He will not need to prove himself, because he has faced himself. He will not hunger for wealth, because he has found worth. For to know oneself truthfully is the beginning of wisdom, and to see oneself mercifully is the beginning of love. You leave quietly, not as a conqueror, but as one who has finally surrendered. And as you step beyond the mirrors, you realize something extraordinary. You are not leaving them behind. You are carrying them within you. From now on, every act, every word, every thought will reflect who you have become. The galleries that once fed on the dead no longer have power over you, for you have remembered what they forgot, that beauty is not for consumption but for communion. That truth is not a weapon, but a bridge. That wealth, reputation, and even art itself mean nothing if they do not lead you toward life. And perhaps this was the lesson all along, that every soul is a gallery, and the question is not what it displays, but what it worships. And so, after the mirrors have done their holy work, you step into a place that feels unlike the rest. It is not grand. It is not silent. It is alive. The air hums softly, not with ambition or vanity, but with peace. There are no walls here, no paintings, no pedestals, only a long table stretching into infinity, lit by the warm glow of unseen light. It is simple. It is sacred. It is the feast of the living. Here, there are no servants or masters, no rich or poor, no greater or lesser. Each soul sits side by side, clothed not in status, but in sincerity. The plates are not filled with food that spoils, but with the fruits of the Spirit, joy, patience, kindness, truth, and when they eat, they are nourished by what they give to one another. This is the place the dead cannot enter, not because they are forbidden, but because they have forgotten how to love. For love is the only currency that spends here, the only wealth that multiplies in the giving. You notice something profound. There are no thrones here, only chairs. No crowns, only laughter. No speeches, only conversation. And the greatest among them are those who listen the most. In the feast of the living, abundance is not measured by possession, but by participation. You do not own anything here. You share everything. You give without fear, because there is no scarcity. You receive without guilt, because there is no pride. The soul learns what the world never taught it, that plenty begins when comparison ends. You see people who once chased glory now radiant in humility. You see the once anxious resting in gratitude. You see the once greedy becoming generous, not because they are commanded to, but because they finally remember what fullness feels like. There is music here, not the kind you hear with your ears, but the kind that rises from within. It is the music of alignment, of spirit and truth meeting again after a long separation. Every heart beats in rhythm with every other. There is no discord, no competition, only harmony, as if creation itself were exhaling in relief. And as you watch, you understand. This is what wealth was meant to be. Not ownership, but overflow. Not accumulation, but communion. In the feast of the living, every act of gratitude becomes a seed. Every word of kindness becomes bread. Every honest tear becomes wine. Here joy is not earned, it is remembered, because joy is not a reward, but a return to what was always true, that you were made not to take, but to give, not to impress, but to illuminate. You feel something within you loosen the last remnants of fear. Fear of not having enough, fear of not being enough, fear of losing what was never yours to keep. And as it falls away, peace takes its place. Not the fragile peace of silence, but the radiant peace of wholeness. Then, somewhere near the head of the table, you notice a figure you recognize, though not by face. There is no crown, no halo, no distance, only gentleness, the kind of presence that makes you want to weep without knowing why. He speaks without words, and yet every soul hears. You have been feeding on the dead, on pride, on fear, on pretense. But now you will eat from life, not because you have earned it, but because you have remembered it. And the truth pierces you softly. All along, the galleries were your hunger misunderstood. You sought meaning in mirrors, peace in possessions, power in performance, but what you were craving was communion, the reunion of your soul with its source. You finally see it. Wealth was never a thing to chase. It was a truth to embody. The richest man is not the one with the full hand, but the one with the open heart. The richest woman is not the one adored by the world, but the one in whom love cannot stop flowing. And in that recognition, you feel a shift, a subtle, sacred realignment. You are no longer consuming beauty. You are creating it. No longer worshiping success. You are sanctifying it. No longer feeding on the dead. You are breathing life into everything you touch. The table grows brighter, as if every soul is a candle, and the light of one ignites the next. The room expands beyond sight, stretching into eternity. This is heaven not as destination, but as awakening, not a reward for dying, but the moment you truly begin to live. You understand now why the dead cannot eat here. To eat you must hunger, but for the right thing. You must thirst, but for the eternal. You must desire not to be filled, but to be poured out. The feast of the living never ends, because love never stops multiplying. Each soul that remembers its worth becomes another vessel of abundance. Each act of grace becomes another melody in the eternal song of creation. And this is the lesson, the one hidden in the title all along. The dead feed on what perishes, the living feed on what endures. The dead consume, the living commune. You close your eyes, and the galleries fade. The market, the theater, the cathedral, all of them dissolve into memory. Only the table remains. The table and the truth. That life is not about having more. It is about becoming more. More generous, more awake, more aligned, more alive. And as the light rises, you realize you have not escaped the galleries. You have transformed them. They are no longer prisons. They are temples. They no longer feed on the dead. They are sanctuaries for the living. For where the Spirit lives, nothing can decay. And now, the final gallery unfolds not through walls or corridors, but through revelation. There are no doors here, no entrances, no exits. It is not a place you step into, but a truth that steps into you. It is called the Great Restoration. It begins with stillness, a silence that does not frighten, but heals. The noise of ambition fades, the echo of reputation dies, and the hollow hunger for meaning finally falls quiet. You stand in that holy emptiness, naked of titles, stripped of illusions, emptied of noise, and for the first time you are whole. It is then that you realize restoration does not mean returning to what was lost. It means becoming what was intended. The fall was never the end. It was the invitation to awaken. You were not created to live in galleries of comparison, reputation, or greed. You were created to walk in gardens of wonder, where love is the light and truth is the air. The great restoration begins the moment you stop seeking worth outside yourself. For the kingdom was never distant. It was buried beneath distraction. It waited behind every act of pride, beneath every craving for validation, beneath every fear of not being enough. It waited for your surrender, and when surrender comes, it does not destroy, it resurrects. You begin to feel the pulse of something ancient and eternal rising through you. The spirit you thought you lost was never gone. It was waiting beneath the rubble of self-importance, beneath the noise of modern ambition. It had been whispering all along, "Be still. You are not the hunger. You are the bread." That is the revelation, that you were not born to consume life, but to feed it. You were not meant to compete for light, but to become a vessel through which light flows. Every pain you carried, every gallery you walked through, every false crown you wore, all of it was refining you for this. You were never cursed. You were being sculpted. You see it now, the pattern that was invisible before, the humiliation that taught you humility, the loneliness that carved the shape of compassion, the failure that burned away pretense. Each wound was not punishment but preparation. Each loss, a doorway disguised as an ending. And so, the great restoration is not a return to innocence. It is a rebirth into wisdom. Innocence was untested. Wisdom is sanctified through experience. You now know what the galleries could not teach, that the soul does not grow by gaining, but by giving. That heaven is not a location, but a condition, the alignment of will with truth. In this restored light you see that everything was sacred all along. Even the hunger that led you astray was holy, because it was the echo of the divine longing within you. It was never about escaping the world, it was about redeeming it. The art, the wealth, the reputation, the mirrors, they were never evil in themselves. It was the forgetfulness that corrupted them. It was man's worship of creation instead of the Creator, the desire for applause instead of authenticity. But once you remember, everything changes. The same gold that once represented greed now becomes generosity. The same stage that once served ego now becomes a platform for truth. The same mirror that once condemned you now reflects grace. The same crown that once enslaved you now rests lightly, a symbol not of domination but of devotion. This is the great restoration, not the end of striving, but the transformation of striving into service. Not the end of wealth, but the sanctification of it. Not the end of ambition, but the redirection of it toward goodness. And in that shift, the world begins to heal. You see it like ripples in water, small acts of truth, creating waves of renewal. A kind word replaces a cruel one. A generous choice cancels a selfish impulse. A moment of humility silences a storm of pride. The restoration is not loud, it is faithful. It does not arrive in triumph, but in tenderness. You begin to realize that heaven does not descend with thunder. It grows quietly in the soil of human hearts that have remembered how to love. That is the miracle that divinity does not demand spectacle, only sincerity. You walk now through what was once your ruin, and everywhere you look, life blooms again. The house of reputation has become the chapel of integrity. The museum of comparison has become the garden of gratitude. The cathedral of prosperity has become the sanctuary of stewardship. The hall of indifference hums again with compassion. The theater of hypocrisy has transformed into the school of truth. The market of broken crowns has become the workshop of service. And the gallery of mirrors now reflects the glory of grace, not the prison of ego. This is the redemption of all things, the death of consumption, the resurrection of communion, the end of spectacle, the rebirth of sincerity. You stand at the center of it all, not as the viewer now, but as the artist. The Creator paints through your hands, speaks through your kindness, builds through your courage. For the Spirit of God is not a visitor, it is a resident. You are not the museum. You are the living gallery of the divine. And perhaps that is what all creation has been waiting for, the day man remembers he was never meant to worship art, but to become it. Not to hang meaning on walls, but to embody it in the way he lives, loves, forgives, and gives. The galleries no longer feed on the dead, because the dead have awakened. The living have remembered what they were always meant to be, conduits of the infinite carriers of compassion, reflections of eternity. And so the sermon ends not in applause, but in peace. No thunder, no curtain, no conclusion. Only the quiet recognition that everything sacred has been restored to its rightful place within you. The light does not blind now, it fills. The silence does not haunt now, it heals. The journey does not end now, it begins. And if you listen closely, you can still hear it, the whisper of the eternal artist, speaking softly through the restored soul. Feed no longer on the dead, for you are alive. And life true, radiant, indestructible life is the only masterpiece worth creating.